The handshake that shook tennis. The 2025 U.S. Open incident. In competitive sports, especially tennis, the post-match handshake is supposed to be a simple ritual, a brief moment to release the tension that built up over every serve, every rally, every critical point. But at the 2025 U.S. Open, that handshake did not just break down. It exploded into one of the most shocking and talked about confrontations in modern tennis history. What happened at the net on Court 11 at Flushing Meadows was not just a clash between two players. It became a defining moment about honor, prejudice, character, and what it truly means to compete with dignity. The two words spoken at that net, cold, sharp, and deeply cutting, transformed Taylor Townsend from victorious hero into a publicly humiliated target. They also sent Jelena Ostapenko spiraling into a wave of global criticism and outrage that would follow her long after the tournament ended. From the packed stand to Court 11 to the far corners of social media, from press conference rooms to locker room whispers, the entire world was pulled into the storm. And at the center of it all was a single phrase powerful enough to erase sportsmanship, disrespect a fellow competitor, and ignite a worldwide debate. This is the full story of what happened that night in New York. The fire on Court 11. On a hot August evening in New York, Court 11 at Flushing Meadows was electric. The stands were completely packed, and the humidity hung heavy in the summer air as the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Taylor Townsend, a 29-year-old American player well known to the home fans, stepped onto the court wearing a simple white outfit with fierce focus in her eyes. Across the net stood Jelena Ostapenko, the 2017 French Open champion. Tall and composed with her trademark icy expression and squared shoulders that radiated confidence and defiance. What should have been a routine second-round match immediately crackled with intensity, as if something bigger than tennis was about to unfold. In the early stages, Ostapenko took control. Her powerful, free-swinging strokes pushed her to a commanding 5-3 lead in the first set. The American crowd grew quiet. Townsend appeared to be struggling, and it looked like the match might end without much drama. But then everything changed. Townsend stepped to the baseline, took a long, steady breath, and seemed to channel something deep within herself. What followed was a complete transformation. She unleashed a relentless string of cross-court backhands, tricky serves, and precise shot-making that left Ostapenko scrambling. From being down 3-5, Townsend reeled off 4 straight games to close out the first set 7-5. The crowd erupted. The momentum had completely flipped. The second set was even more dominant. Townsend continued to dominate, winning game after game. By the time the scoreboard read 6-1, she had strung together 9 consecutive games. A stunning, historic run that left Ostapenko helpless. When the final point was won, Townsend pumped her fist and Court 11 thundered with cheers. It was a comeback for the ages. But the real story had not yet started, the phrase that changed everything. As the two players walked toward the net for the traditional post-match handshake, the cameras zoomed in. Ostapenko's face was tight with frustration. Her eyes were burning. She leaned in toward Townsend with unmistakable anger and spoke in a sharp, cutting voice. No class, no education. Townsend froze. She looked as if she had been slapped right there in front of thousands of fans and millions of television viewers. But Ostapenko was not finished. She followed with another cutting remark. Outside the U.S., it's different. The stadium went silent. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some spectators shouted in protest. Others covered their mouths in disbelief. Townsend stood there and looked her opponent directly in the eyes. Her lip trembled slightly, but she held herself together with remarkable composure. Rather than firing back with anger, she turned toward the crowd, raised both arms wide, and ignited a thunderous roar of support that shook the entire arena. The cameras captured everything. Ostapenko pointing a finger, Townsend responding with a look of pure defiance. The match had ended. A new confrontation had begun, one that had nothing to do with tennis scores and everything to do with pride, prejudice, and personal character. The moment lasted only a few seconds at the net, but within minutes, it was everywhere. 2 words had exploded on social media. The video hit social media like a lit match dropped into a gas tank. On X and TikTok, shares and views multiplied rapidly. Every angle, every frame of slow-motion replay, Every expression caught by the cameras was analyzed and reanalyzed. The phrase "no class, no education" was repeated across millions of screens as the entire world replayed the moment that a sacred post-match ritual had been turned into a public verbal assault. Ostapenko fired back first on Instagram. She claimed that Townsend had been disrespectful during the match by hitting a let-cord shot at a crucial moment without apologizing, something she called a violation of tennis etiquette, and claimed it was the first time she had ever witnessed it on tour. But the tone of her post was aggressive and dismissive. Rather than cooling things down, it added more fuel to the fire. The online community split immediately. One group sided with Ostapenko, arguing that she was only asking for basic courtesy and that tennis has unwritten rules of sportsmanship. But the much larger group was furious. Screenshots of Ostapenko pointing her finger at Townsend circulated with the caption, "The villain of a U.S. Open." Comments poured in from every direction. People wrote that Ostapenko never changes, that this was not just poor sportsmanship but public humiliation, and that her behavior had no place in professional sports. When Townsend walked into her press conference, the room was packed with reporters and camera flashes. Her voice was calm and measured, but every word carried enormous weight. She confirmed what she had been told at the net. For many people, the phrase "no class, no education" might seem like a common insult, but for a black woman who grew up in challenging circumstances and had fought for everything she achieved, those words carried an entirely different and far heavier meaning. Townsend was composed but powerful. She told the room that those words were not just a personal insult. They carried the weight of generations of prejudice that her community had been forced to endure. She was not going to reduce them to a petty argument. The room went completely quiet, then filled with deep respect. Townsend had not just won a tennis match. She had won the room. Ostapenko's own press conference did little to help her. She insisted she had no discriminatory or personal intent, claiming she was only reacting to what she saw as a violation of an unwritten tennis rule. But instead of calming the situation, her words added more controversy. Fans and commentators immediately asked why the rule mattered more than basic decency. Why was her reaction so personal and so cutting? What did "outside the U.S. it's different" even mean? Tennis stars take sides. As the debate exploded across every platform, the rest of the tennis world could not stay silent. The first major voice to speak out was Naomi Osaka, the former world number one and one of the most recognized figures in women's tennis. At a press conference following her own match, Osaka spoke directly and without hesitation. She said that calling a black woman uneducated was a stab directly at the heart, especially in a sport where the majority of the audience remains overwhelmingly white. Those words, she said, did not just hurt Townsend. They awakened the memories of generations of people who had been underestimated, dismissed, and denied equal recognition. The room erupted in applause. Osaka had made herself a shield for Townsend, and her words put enormous additional pressure on Ostapenko's already damaged public image. Ajla Tomljanovic, the Australian player who had her own fiery confrontation with Ostapenko at Wimbledon in 2021, also weighed in on a television commentary program. She recalled how Ostapenko had called a medical timeout during their match, a timeout Tomljanovic believed was being used as a tactic to interrupt momentum. She noted plainly that Ostapenko has a long history of making herself the center of attention, and usually not in a positive way, by bringing up the Wimbledon incident. The public began to understand that the U.S. Open confrontation was not an isolated moment. It was part of a pattern. Other players added their voices. Sloane Stephens posted just 3 words on X: "Respect matters." That was enough for the entire tennis community to understand exactly whose side she was on. Madison Keys said on a podcast that while tennis is an incredibly demanding sport, no victory is worth trampling on basic human respect. Former commentator Pam Shriver on ESPN stated that in over 30 years of following the sport, she had seen many arguments and controversies. But what worried her most about this one was that the language Ostapenko used carried layers of meaning that went far beyond a sporting disagreement. The lasting consequences. In the days and weeks following the incident, the impact on both players became increasingly clear. For Townsend, something unexpected happened. The scandal opened doors that a normal tournament victory might not have. Her name spread across not just sports headlines, but cultural discussions, social justice conversations, and mainstream media coverage. Commentators called her a warrior of self-respect. More fans showed up to her practice sessions. Young black players across America saw in her a model of quiet, unshakable strength, the kind that does not need a scream to be heard. For Ostapenko, the damage was serious and lasting. Sponsorship deals grew quiet. A major international sports brand began removing her images from their social media channels. Major newspapers not only covered the U.S. Open incident, but dug back into the Wimbledon 2021 confrontation and other moments of controversy, painting a picture of a player with extraordinary talent who consistently undermined herself with her temper and her words. There was no official WTA penalty, but the court of public opinion issued its own verdict. The incident also sparked a wider conversation in tennis about unwritten rules, player conduct, and whether the sport's traditions were doing enough to address prejudice. Experts began asking whether a sport is aristocratic and tradition-bound, as tennis was truly as open and fair as it liked to claim. One phrase at a net in New York had cracked open a conversation that many people in tennis had been avoiding for years. Talk shows, podcasts, and news programs dissected the event for weeks. NBA players, Olympic athletes, and celebrities from completely unrelated fields weighed in. The story of Townsend and Ostapenko had become bigger than tennis. The final lesson. What happened on Court 11 at the 2025 U.S. Open is a story about much more than a let-cord shot or a handshake gone wrong. It is a story about what we reveal about ourselves when the pressure is highest and the cameras are closest. Townsend revealed grace, resilience, and a refusal to be diminished. Ostapenko revealed that talent alone is never enough. That character is the thing that truly defines a legacy. A match can end in 2 hours. A championship title can be celebrated and eventually forgotten. But a phrase spoken at the net in a moment of anger can follow a person for a lifetime. Court 11 in New York did not just witness a tennis comeback. It became the place where two very different legacies were written in real time. One built on dignity, and one buried by the absence of it. In sports, skill earns victories. But how you carry yourself determines everything that comes after.